got audio.
Hey, what's up, fellas? Good evening. For an exciting bright coat class. There's quite a few people in the group,
I got audio.
but
Hey, what's up, fellas?
we're going to go ahead and get started because this is recorded, and I don't know how many of them even planned on watching it with us live. What's up, Jose? You've been doing some cutting, brother. I've been watching you. All right, so we'll start with the boring and get it over with, and that's the tools that we're going to be using in this type of engraving tonight. In this game, the flat graver is going to be pretty much the star running back. It in various sizes. This is a wide one. This one was sharpened out of just a regular 332 blank from Steve Lindsay. And probably of all the gravers, the flat graver is the simplest. It's got a 45-degree face and a 15-degree heel. Turn that slow so you can see it. No smoke and mirrors about it. Pretty straightforward. Nothing was done on the sides. Just a 45-degree face, 15-degree heel. Some people like to radius this heel as they're grinding the heel. I'm not personally a fan of that. I do mine straight and square, straight and square. I would encourage you to play with it. Maybe you like it a little bit better. The argument is that whenever you're making a turn, that radiused heel doesn't want to roll that edge nearly as bad, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Your wriggle tool, which is going to be another one that's a biggie. Again, as small as that looks, all this is just a smaller, narrower flat graver. Still, 45-degree face, 15-degree heel. I did grind that one on the side just because I wanted to make it a little bit narrower so that I could do this small wriggle with it. But again, it's just a 45-degree face, 15-degree heel, aka the flat graver. This is another one that we'll be using in the video tonight. Also just a flat graver. Now I grind all of mine to the size and width that I want them based on what I'm trying to do. This one was used for this. This would be something that you would use to wriggle a border around something. If I were going to assign a number to these, I know that you can get these pretty readily from GRS. This one right here that I'm showing you, that this width of wriggle was made with, this would be about a 40, a number 40. And this little bitty dude here that these smaller lines were done with, this would be about a 37. I would encourage you to get comfortable making your own gravers from just a blank. But as you can see, three of the deals that we're using are flat gravers. Other gravers that we're going to be using, I'm going to be using a couple of liner tools. It cuts multiple lines at one time. Now, this is kind of an item of confusion inside the game. And Dane's going to post a link in the comment that'll explain it just as well as anybody ever has. And when you click on the link, it's towards the bottom of the page that it explains what these numbers mean. But basically 10 is referring to how wide this piece of metal is. And the 20 doesn't mean that there's 20 lines on it. If you divide that by 2, it's going to be 0.0010, and that's telling you the distance between these lines. And I looked around a little while today to try to find you guys a source for a 2010, and unsuccessfully it was. But the closest thing I found to it was a 2410, which is just going to be a little bit finer, more of a frosty look than this is going to give. And then an 1810 is probably the most common liner tool that's used in Western style engraving. But anyway, follow that link when you get a chance and read up on it, and it'll fill in the missing pieces of the puzzle about this. Now, you do want to get, they sell these liners in 3 configurations. There's straight, there's curved, and then there's bent. What you would like to get is bent. And to my knowledge, nobody sells a liner ready to go in a pneumatic handpiece. You have to grind them. Don't be scared to grind them. You can watch this video back and look at this goofy shape. I'll explain what that's for here in just a little bit. Look at this goofy shape, and don't be scared to grind on these things. They're just a piece of steel. And but I do want to point out that every liner that I've ever seen has been made out of high-speed steel. So while you're grinding on it and shaping on it, every now and again dunk it in water. What you don't want to do is let this get hot, because then it messes up the temper in the steel, and now it's useless then after that. It'll dull every 5 seconds. So while you're grinding on it, just keep it cool. And that's the profile that you're going to want, or something similar. This is not absolutely necessary, this notch right here. What that's for is if you're trying to turn around, and let's just say there's bead wire or something. If I was engraving on something that had something soldered to it, it would give me the ability to get up really close to that. That's all that is. It's just clearance. Some people double stack them and they'll laser weld them. I'm fresh out of laser welder, so this was my solution to it. And then I also have, for cross hatching, we have a wider liner. Now you notice that the face of this one has got a radius to it. A lot of people will grind a radius even on their regular liner that they're going to do most of their shading with. We'll talk about that when we're actually using it. I'm not a fan of that, but I know a lot of really good Western engravers that like it. Now I will put a radius on this. This is what I use to cross hatch with, and I've had this thing for about 20 years. Liners are not something you're going to be replacing very often if you use them on sterling silver, copper, things like that. This is a 32/8, and this core, it's real coarse. It is available at GRS. It is on their site. So the best that you might be able to do is this graver, and maybe an 1810 would be my suggestion. Then the only other graver that we're going to use in this style is a V graver. Now you could certainly use a 116, you could use a 120, whatever you're already comfortable with. If you're comfortable with anything, don't reinvent the wheel. This is actually a 110 degree graver, but it's got a 60-degree face on it, and I don't want to get you confused. You don't have to change anything about how you're sharpening your gravers. But because it has a steeper face on it, I'm able to go to a narrower geometry, because it makes the reaction time of rolling that graver much faster. And this is kind of a new idea to the market, and Steve just came out with the friction graver templates. They're called friction gravers if you want to play with them. But don't reinvent the wheel. You're just going to a 116, a 120, something in that neighborhood. And other than that, the only tool we're going to use is a scribe. So if you're new to Western style engraving, which I'm going to assume that everybody is, there's a couple of concepts or cuts that you're going to need to get good at that are not common in gun engraving and things like that. What you're going to really want to acquire the ability to do is to roll this graver almost as if it was Yeah, Tanya, I will. As I switch tools, whenever we start doing the engraving, I'll make a note that we're switching to such and such tool. But probably before you even attempt this, is practice starting on one corner of your wide flat graver and challenge yourself to make that burr go all the way across the face. That's trickier than you might think. And I'm going to switch to the scope so you can look at it, be looking at it straight down. To get you in focus. But you'll want to start right on that edge. And you want to be in control of how rapidly or how slowly see how the burr is all the way across the face right there. You in time want to get to where you can do that at will, because that's kind of the key to this style. And don't just practice going one direction. Get comfortable going both directions. Tanya said that link you posted doesn't go to the liners. There's a second tab open that actually has the product page. One of them is a description of the mat, the other one is, yeah, that's where you can actually buy liners at. Okay. Okay. So, as boring as that right there seems, that's going to be something that you really want to work on. It's going to be key to making this style work. I think it was Diane Solis said this is the easiest style to learn and the hardest style to master, and she might have been dead on the money with that comment. But you want to be able to control the rate at which this gets wider. And that's going to take you some practice if it's not already in your playbook. Another cut that you're going to want to practice a pretty good bit is what they call the S cut. And you're going to make the S by turning your ball. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in just a few minutes, and then we'll switch to a different camera. But starting on a corner, you want to be able to roll that graver to where you're making a wide cut, and then lift it back up and make it thin again. And you can see how that vaguely resembles an S, which is where it got its name. And it's not a bad idea to practice some of those right on top of each other so that you're actually having to hit a target and you're not just randomly cutting. And by picking up that graver control, you'll also be, it's also going to make some other things a possibility for you. And these are all skill sets that you never really come across in gun engraving, because a flat graver can't hold up to the harder metals and stuff. And it is my opinion that when somebody starts engraving from scratch, I think that this is the first style that they should learn. And then second to this would go into a modified bright cut. And then from there you can go into relief style American scroll. And then once you get to that point, you've got enough graver control that you can kind of go in any direction that you want. Gary, whenever you start to make that tapered cut, in the beginning, it's going to get deeper on you. But what you want to be able to do, I mean, because your natural reaction to widening this cut is going to be to lift up. And you can hear the machine kind of bog down when I do that. And it doesn't matter if it's a Lindsay machine or a GRS. If you lift up as you get wider, which you're going to have a tendency to do because the mind thinks that gives you more control. What you want to practice is not lifting up. And the depth of cut doesn't get any deeper, it only gets wider. If I zoom in on that, get you where you can see, the depth of cut never really got any deeper on my cut side. The only thing that happened is the cut got wider. Now, it's going to take you some practice to be able to do that because, like I said, naturally you're going to want to lift up because you're going to feel like you're losing control. The engraver's going to try to skate out from underneath you. And then, like magic, one day it's going to be like, oh, okay, well, this is easy. But these are going to be, you know, kind of your main cuts of this style of engraving. And get comfortable with it, go in both directions. And you're going to want to get comfortable driving the tool on its very edge. And I promise you that getting good at doing this will make whatever challenges you face down the road in gun engraving or knife engraving, you know, any style of engraving that you continue on to, the foundation that you're going to get from this style is going to give you excellent engraver control. Now, this same motion that we just made with the flat engraver starting on one corner and laying it out wide like so, you're going to want to also get comfortable doing that with your liner tool, because the motion that you're going to take with this is going to be very similar. You're going to want to start narrow and be able to gradually widen that. Now, I had mentioned earlier that some people like a rounded radius on the front of their deal. Some really good engravers, Jeremiah Watts, I think, rounds his liners. I'm not sure, but he's certainly a good engraver. So here's a radius tool, and the reason that I don't round them is, let me grab something to point with. I can see this first tooth right here, but when I lay the engraver over on its edge, it goes out of my view. Now, it's certainly still possible to pick that up one line at a time. Okay, you can certainly still do it, but I think the visibility is much better with the square tool. So each to his own. Try it both ways. I like mine square. Weldon Lister, who's probably the only gun engraver that uses a liner tool very much, likes his square, and to be honest with you, he's the one that kind of turned me on to squaring it off. You'd have a lot more control when you just need one or two lines instead of the whole line. Mark, the only way that you're going to sharpen a liner is because you do have lines on the bottom of it. Obviously you can't put a heel on it. You can only sharpen the face. That's all you do, which is the reason that you want a bent liner. It's because that little bit of relief that you get from it being bent acts as your heel so that it elevates you while you're cutting. Let me go to a different camera. So that it elevates you while you're cutting, because without a heel and without a bend in it, you're going to be down here. You're not going to have anywhere for your hand to go. Your fingers are going to hang up on everything. So when you sharpen the liner, you can only sharpen the face, like so. And I would recommend sharpening it at about 55 degrees. 45, you'll get away with 45, but if you try to use it on any harder metals, you're going to find that these teeth, if I hold that just right, you can see that that's real jagged out there on the end. If you don't put a pretty steep face on these, those teeth aren't going to hold up very long. They're going to round off. You're going to be resharpening all the time. So if you go ahead and put a bit of a steeper face on it, these are tougher. I use this liner in stainless steel on Spyderco's and all of that. So, and Tim, on round surfaces, you can still use a liner. It will. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to require a pretty good bit of gravity control because I know the round surfaces that you speak of, and they're quite small, and they get round real quick. But yes, you can definitely use a liner. Once you got the bite of the bit in the metal, it offers probably more resistance than a flat graver. So you can ride the resistance, so to speak. And I think you'll find it controllable. I've seen your work. You cut pretty well. So, um, all right. Well, let's talk about the wriggle for just a minute. There's really not a whole lot to this. I jokingly compare it to moving a refrigerator. Yeah, Tanya, I grind that spot in them right there. Again, it's not absolutely necessary that it has that, but it's so that I have clearance if you've got bead wire or a raised edge or something like that. And don't overthink it. There's no rocket science right here. Here's the cutting edge. I ground it back. I didn't want to completely grind this all the way out here on the end because I wouldn't be able to resharpen this very many times until it was useless. So I made a compromise, left a little bit of life in the graver so that I can sharpen it, ever how many times before I get back here, and then the liner's no good. So you can make your own decisions about that based on your application. Just know that the only thing that notch is for clearance. If there was a stone set or a bezel cup or something like that, it offers clearance faster. That's all. Not necessary for this to be utilized. So jokingly, when I try to explain the wriggle to people, I ask them if they've ever had to move a refrigerator by themselves. Okay, I'm gonna answer Tanya's question right quick. Whenever I grind the face on the liner, I just hang that off of the edge of the power hone. Hang on, and I'll grab a power hone. So if this was on my power hone and it was spinning, just by hand, I'm gonna set that down on the corner right there and just do that number right there while this is spinning.
Patiently and dunking it in water quite often.
Yeah, good point. Zane pointed out patiently because you don't want to get this hot. Now, if you're using the GRS power hone, they're so slow you don't have a chance of getting it hot. But if you got a different power hone or you're using your drill press for a hone or whatever, but the edge of these stones will cut, and you can just hang it off of the edge like that with it spinning, and you'll be amazed how quick it'll ground that little notch in it. So anyway, I was saying a while ago that if you've ever had to move a refrigerator by yourself, you already know about a wriggle. And basically, it's a flat graver. You can use whatever size you want. Let the size of the border that you want dictate the size of graver that you use. But you're going to want to go from corner to corner like that right there. And then I'll give you a little different view of it. You're just walking this thing from corner to corner like that right there. So, important to point out is, let me hit the record button on that thing so it don't shut off on us. You're not moving your whole arm to get that to move. Think of opening and closing a doorknob. that motion is all in the wrist. Ow, don't stab yourself like that. Maybe I should look at what I'm doing instead of the TV screen. But the motion is in your wrist. Imagine opening and closing a doorknob. And what you want to do is try to go the same distance this way that you go this way. And it's a kind of a strange thing to get used to. And what I used to do when I was new to it is I would use my thumb and press my graver against my thumb and let my thumb be the guideline. And then I would kind of have something to, I don't know, training wheels, if you will. Something, it just made me feel better back then. But eventually, you'll develop the feel for this. It's opening and closing the doorknob, opening and closing the doorknob. And as far as downward pressure, I'm not really putting any to speak of. Just kind of the weight of my hand. I'm not mashing. It's just the weight of my hand. And you're going to play with this angle right here until you find the sweet spot where it really wants to cut well. Now, if you're really elevated, you're going to get a real tight wriggle. Everything's going to be really close together. Each to his own. I don't really like the look of it. I like a little bit of a looser wriggle, and that's going to come from being down low. And as you get more confident doing this, you're going to feel comfortable lower and lower and lower and lower. In the beginning, you're probably going to want to be elevated just because it's going to feel like the tool wants to slip on you. But this right here is about the right angle, so you can get a visual on that. And then I want to go back to the microscope camera and show the difference in those two lines that we just wriggled. Of course, they're shiny, so. All right, we'll try camera number 1. Yeah, that's a much better shot at it. So you can see this one that's really close together. That was the one that we did when our hand was really elevated up high. And this one was more at about that angle right there. And it is possible, to answer your question, Mark, it is possible to wriggle with power, but I would say that I can't think of a single instance where it was necessary. If anything, it makes it harder. I'll take a really wide wriggle. So let me turn the machine off. Here is a wriggle with a full width graver, no power. Here's a wriggle. Right next to it with power. Very little difference, and if I had to pick the one I like better, I think I like this one better than that one. So each to his own. It can be done with power, but again, I don't know that there would be a call for that, because if you there's not really very many engraving jobs that a wriggle would be an appropriate border on, that you would need power to do. In other words, in stainless steel or something like that. It's just not going to help you that much. But if you try it and you like it better, then each to his own, man. I just don't think you will. So I'm going to put my V-graver in. To not be geometry specific, I'm going to refer to this as V-graver. And by V-graver, I mean 116, 120, 105, whatever the heck you want to use. It really doesn't even matter. Whatever you're more comfortable with, whatever your go-to tool is. If you don't have a go-to tool, then I would recommend either a 115 or a 116. I'm of the opinion that a 120 is a little bit wide, but you know what they say about opinions. So I want to talk about just cutting a scroll, and it's not the scroll that's the point of what I'm going to say. There was a lot of times in cutting that I stopped, and then I continued on, continued on. Don't move this hand in an attempt to continue to go around that scroll. Bring the metal to your tool. We'll cut another little scroll here. Now I'm beginning to turn. I'm turning the vise. I'm not moving my hand. And when I've moved to the point where it's not comfortable to turn the vise anymore, I stop and reposition my hand on the vise and then continue cutting. I've let off of the pedal. Everything stops. Move my hand. And then continue cutting. On a side note, that right there is why people prefer vices that have a big diameter. The bigger the diameter, the more of a turn that you can make before you have to reposition. If I was holding a little bitty vise, I can't turn very far until I need to move my hand and get another hold. If you're working on a turntable, you can turn a long ways before you need to reposition your hand because of how big around the circle is that you're turning. You could probably file that in useless information, but if you're doing a little vise shopping and you know this is the style of engraving that you want, the reason everybody wants a big vise is not necessarily for the weight of it, it's the diameter of it and how far you can rotate it before you have to reposition your hand. So I'm going to make that same scroll cut, but I'm going to switch cameras because it's really, really important that you see that this hand right here, the one holding the tool, does not move. All of the movement takes place in the vise. That is absolute key to this style of engraving. The rule, if there were rules, the things that you need to be really good at to get really good at this style is don't move your engraving hand. Get all of your movement out of the vise, and then get to where you're comfortable rolling the graver. So let me switch to another camera so that you can kind of see what that looks like. All right. I zigged when I should have zagged. I hit the wrong button. So I'm just gonna cut a scroll, and I want you to notice how much none of this moves and that all of this is where the movement is, because you want to practice it that way. It's not comfortable anymore, so I'm going to move my hand back. Everything stopped and I'm putting my hand back. Now I extended my arm so everything stops. I'm moving my hand back around. And the only control that this hand has over anything, this arm, this business right here, is it controls elevation and it controls roll. It doesn't go after anything. It doesn't finish a scroll. It stays right here. You should be able to put something under your arm and hold it the whole time that you engrave and never drop it. So the only thing this guy right here can do is up and down and roll. None of this. No, we call it chicken winging around here. No chicken winging. Keep all of that intact and bring the work to the tool. Now the exception to that is on a straight line. If you're cutting a straight line, then that's fine. Let them go across the metal. Just because it doesn't make any sense to start cutting a straight line and then drag the whole vise. That's a lot harder to do. So anyway, if you took nothing away from that, when you practice engraving, practice not moving this hand. It controls elevation and graver roll. That's it. It does not have any privileges to do this. Perfect practice makes perfect. I see Chanel. Yeah, Chanel knows about the chicken wing. So, and a big diameter vise will help you if you haven't already got a vise. Now, if you've already got a vise, don't go buy another one just because you think yours is small. Just reposition your hand, stop engraving, reposition your hand. That will really help you make your scrolls perfectly round. So, on the wriggle, and since this is geared towards traditional Western engraving, let me kind of make some of those practice cuts make sense. Now, most of us that started doing Western style engraving would do our layout with a fine tip felt pen. Did it that way for years, though I don't recommend it. It's going to be more visible in this video, and then I'll show you what I do recommend. What I want to point out a while ago, whenever I was saying that this hand does not move, all your movement comes from the vise, the reason I want to cut this scroll is I want to show you that if I draw this scroll, now that's not as bad as I meant to draw it. I want to draw a really crappy scroll. There's a really crappy scroll. Your vise, because it's turning on a bearing, is going to make a perfect circle if you'll stay out of its way. I mean, you spend a bunch of money on a vise, you might as well use it, right? Let's see if I can get this whole scroll in the scope of view here. Almost. It's just a little bit bigger than I wanted it to be, but okay. Let me go back to that other camera. Sorry, fellas. I really want to get this point across. I'm not going to move this hand at all. I'm going to bring all of my work into the vise, or into the tool. And I want to show you that by doing so, my vise cannot follow that screwed up line. And I'm already veering off of that line that I drew because it was so bad. But I'm trusting my vise, and it's going to true this scroll up for me because of the bearing that's in it. And if while you're learning this style, if you'll make friends with trusting the vise, it will pay dividends in all other styles of engraving. And the only thing that was done there was this hand right here didn't move. The tool went into the metal, and then all the movement was made from the vise. And he took a jacked up, messed up scroll, and because this vise and turntable's on a bearing that turns perfectly round, it rounded up that scroll. That's kind of a biggie. So now that we have a round scroll, let's jump forward a little bit and go ahead and do some traditional Western style bright cut. So traditionally, you would start on this corner, and as we make the cut, we're going to roll this graver down wider this way towards the center. Hopefully you can see that. And we're going to go all the way until we run into something. That's called your forehand cut. Don't worry, I'm going to explain it in more detail in just a minute. I'm trying to be very thorough. The second cut is going to be the opposite corner. But if you look in that cut, you can see this ridge line right there in the bottom of that cut right there. Can you guys see that? It shows up on the camera as, I don't know, a dull line or whatever, but that line that you see right there is the line that we're shooting for. That's where we want to line our graver up with, our flat graver. We want to lay that corner in there and catch it just on that line, and we're going to take this cut and make it wider. That's your backhand cut, and then you want to do a cap cut. And your cap cut is what gives you the opportunity. See, I got some little jankiness right here, some where I popped the chip out, everything wasn't true and smooth. Your cap cut gives you the opportunity to crisp all that up, clean all of that up. And it's done just on the corner. But you do want to come all the way around. Don't just go around to right there and call it good. Go ahead and tuck it all the way around. And we'll do that whole process again. You're gonna start in traditional. Now by the way, I'm showing you traditional how to cut this bright cut group. In a minute, I want to show you how we can do it with air and how it's really came a long way. I won't use any power this time. Hopefully I don't slip and stab myself because the geometry is not perfectly right for hand push engraving, but I'll do it here off to the side in case it goes wrong. So, machine's off, you can't hear it running. And the concept of traditional bright cut was before we had all these lovely handy air assisted machines. And I believe that the reason it was done in a 3-cut pattern like that was because it was easier to push that cut and then come back in the groove and push that wider, and then obviously you're going to have these little boogered up spots, and then you could make this cut easy enough to clean those up, and then that process would just repeat itself. And that would be, it's a little rough, but that would be the hand push way of going about it. Now, if you're going to do hand push, I do not recommend a 45-degree face and a 15-degree heel. I would recommend, say, a 35-degree face and a 10 to a 12-degree heel because it's going to offer less resistance moving through the metal. But back to the power. Corner closest to the backbone, and you're going to gradually widen that cut as you turn the vise, and you're going to keep going until you run into something. In this case, it's the other scroll. So we're going to come back in with the opposite corner. Come back in with the opposite corner. We're going to do the same process in reverse. We're going to come around here and we're going to gradually widen that cut. And now you can see it's a little rough right there. We'll take the very corner of our graver and we're just going to outline that and clean it up. So hopefully about this time you're thinking, well, how do you know where those cuts go? How do you know where to put them? And that is pretty much what this class is going to be about. Forehand, because the front of your hand, go to a different camera. I'm guessing that's called a forehand because the front of your hand is facing the work. The second cut would be the backhand where the back of your hand is facing the work. And then the cap cut, which is pretty self-explanatory. So you can see why those tapered cuts are going to come in real handy, and your ability to control them is going to be absolutely key to your ability to do this style of engraving. And we're going to talk about layout a little bit, and then we're going to talk about how to turn those into leaves and such. So in traditional bride cut, just remember, you've got your forehand cut where you start with the corner of the tool. Start with the corner of the tool closest to the backbone. Then your backhand cut where it's the opposite corner starting in the groove that you made, and you're wanting to follow this ridge right here and widen that cut. Another benefit of that is that you've got two reflective surfaces that are going to be pointing at each other, which makes it really catch light. Then the cap. That seems simple enough, right? It's not going to be if you don't practice and get graver control doing that and turning. If it was a Western bride cut live, everybody was here class, I would want everybody to do this about 30 or 40 times or 100 times or however long it takes until you can control that taper. Because there's a little short taper. Here in a few minutes we're going to talk about the layout and the styles of it. And you're going to want to, I want you to get the ability to drag that taper out as long and gradual as you want it to be. Or as short and fast as you want it to be. I want you to get that athletic with it. And the way to do that is just going to be to practice those. And then practicing your S cuts going both ways. And then on your practice cuts, you can practice your cap cuts. You can practice cutting with this right on that corner. Now, confession time. When I refer to traditional bride cut, which is the cut process that I just showed you, but when I say traditional bride cut, what I'm envisioning in my mind is the style or the look of the style, not so much the process of how to get that style. When I'm doing contract engraving, I still do quite a bit of bride cut engraving. I skip the backhand cut. Remember the cut that starts on this corner and you make that cut, and then the opposite corner inside the groove to widen that cut? I believe that that was an easier way to do this, pushing by hand, but now we have power. So if we skip this cut and go straight to this cut, what that would actually look like, because we have the power to get wide, is I can make that cut right there in one pass. And the only change that I have to do is to bring my cap all the way down to the base. and that will give me my secondary reflection to make this really throw a lot of light. This is considerably faster. I'm calling this style of engraving traditional bright cut. The way to cut traditional bright cut is how we were talking here. Now we're talking about the style. And for Tanya's question, I wasn't ignoring you. The tip for remembering which side of the graver you use is to not worry so much about the terminology of forehand, backhand, yada, yada, yada. And whenever you set your tool down, it should be covering the backbone. You shouldn't be able to see the backbone for your tool. You're straddling it, so to speak. Then you go back and clean it up. Okay? Hope that makes sense. I did want to give you the old school information on it, but I recommend that you cut it this way. A, it's going to make it faster. B, you're probably going to do it cleaner. And C, on the finished buckle or whatever it is that you're engraving, that extra cut is going to have little to no value. All right. Hopefully that makes some sense. Now I want to talk a little bit about where in the heck are you going to put all of these cuts? How do you know what cut goes where? And that comes down to layout. And with layout, there's usually some rules. Damn the luck, right? So, learning the rules of layout in this style will help you across the board no matter what style you're headed for. Maybe, you can make a decent run at engraving just doing Western style engraving. But regardless of that, the principles of layout don't change for any engraving style. So as far as the scroll is concerned, since we already know that our vise is going to turn a perfect circle, if you're new to drawing scrolls, something that will help you is a scroll is a game of half rounds. Tell you what, I'm going to say that. I'll get back into that. We get up here where you guys can see that. All right, so in the bright cut game, usually your scrolls are going to be on some item, whether it be a knife bolster or an earring or a bracelet or whatever. They're going to be on some item. And when you draw your scrolls out, try to get you guys a better look at that. That wasn't it. Man, that camera's dirty. That's in the lens. There we go. Now we're back on planet Earth. Right, just cram its face down there. All right, sorry about that, guys. I'm not a fan of the marker, but so that I'm able to convey the information, we're going to use the marker. For the record, I believe in transfer wax, Sam's wax, chapstick, modeling clay, whatever. Smear something on there and then scribe through it. But for visibility reasons, we're going to use a... Why is Chanel pulling that? We're going to use a marker so that we can all see it. So the first rule of a scroll is that it's supposed to fill up the area. and you want it to hit all of the borders that it can hit. And you can see here that the scroll came out, it reached this border, reached this border, reached this border. Number one mistake that people make whenever they start trying to engrave is they're just happy to have drawn a scroll. And now they got all of this area out here they got to figure out what they're going to do with. So they, oh, well, I'll put another scroll and another scroll and another scroll, and then it looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. Don't do this. You want your scroll to reach all the way to the borders, but you can't compromise the roundness of it. Now, if you want to fill up this big area right here with another scroll, power to you. But even here, this scroll reaches the border and the border. Now, I call the backbone of this the border because it's something that the object runs into or bumps into. Once you've wrapped your brain around that, then the only thing that you need to know past that is where do I put all of these cuts for my leaves. So pertaining to Western style engraving, the first things that you're going to cut inside the scroll are going to be your quote unquote bright cuts. Okay? And the first one is going to run parallel to the border. That's how you start this party, if you will. Now from there, these cuts inside here are going to run parallel to the backbone of the scroll and then gradually move away. So it's going to go with the backbone and gradually move away until it runs into something, until it bumps into something. And the point at which it really starts to move away and go off its own way, you're just going to imagine a line across there and you're going to split the difference. And that's going to be the beginning of your next bright cut group. And it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to run parallel with the backbone until it runs into something. You split the difference again. That's the beginning of your next leaf, parallel to the backbone until it runs into something. Now, in populating this scroll right here, this backbone is the border. It's acting as a border to everything that goes on inside here. So your first bright cut is going to be parallel with the border. From there, you're going to imaginary split the difference. There's your first leaf. You're going to go with the backbone, gradually away till you run into something. Imaginary line, split the difference. As you get more graver control, you'll be able to scoot where you split the difference. You'll be able to scoot that further and further back inside of here. But for now, till you get graver control, leave yourself a little bit of room for error. Don't make it too hard on yourself right out of the box. And as strange and loose as that looks, being drawn out with a marker, that's usually, at least in the buckle game and the jewelry game, that's how most people lay this out. They take a fine tip Sharpie and they'll pencil out a scroll here and okay, I want one spinning out of that and coming this way, and a marker's it. I would recommend not, but each to his own. Now, traditionally, old school Western style engraving, the backbones were usually not cut, they were wriggled. And we're doing this with what would probably be a 37. Pretty small. You can see it's quite small in comparison to my finger. And these backbones would get wriggled. So we'll go ahead and do that. One thing that Western engravers are really good at, and people who just jump straight into single point gun style engraving really short themselves at, is Western engravers don't need a very good layout to get started. And the reason for that is, one of the things that you learn doing this style of engraving is that you become very dependent on using your vise as a drawing tool. And I think that that's something that nobody should be deprived of, regardless of what you actually want to end up engraving, or where the finish line of your engraving journey is going to be. I'm a little rusty. But you can see that I've got what appears to be a mess right there. But all I needed was kind of a guideline. So where those black lines are is where our bright cut groups are going to go. So the first one is going to go parallel with the border. And then I'm going to cap it. The next one, remember I've got the corner to where the tool is covering up the backbone. That's how I know what corner to use. I'm going to start cutting and let that gradually taper. And then I'll cut my cap. Go to the scope, maybe we can see this a little bit better. So you can see where I'm going to split the difference. About the time this leaf really started making its transition, really started arcing away, I'll start the next cut. And I'll set my corner down, the corner of my flat graver, I'll set it down, splitting the difference between those two. And then as I roll the vise, I'm going to roll the tool to make a wider cut. What you're going for here almost looks like the Nike symbol. Then we're going to go back and cap it. And then this process is just going to repeat itself over and over again. Until you get to the end of the scroll. Got a little heel drag on that one. Which, by the way, that little ridge right there, this little burr, is what some people would put that radiused heel. This sharp edge right here that I have, that's blurry. That crisp edge that I have right here at the back of this tool, they would round that off right there, and theoretically it gets rid of that heel drag, but that's not been my experience. And for me, this is a pretty tough style to cut slow. Now I'm trying to cut it slow so that we can all see what we got going on here. So I'm covering the backbone with my tool, and I'm raising up to the corner. Now I went ahead and cut all of those and didn't cut any of the caps. So now we'll go back and cap everything. And if you need a trick in your mind about what corner to use on the cap, when you cut your bright cut, let the tool cover the backbone. When you cut your cap cut, let the tool cover the bright cut. Now, this space that we left inside of here, the reason we left that is so that whenever we run our liner tool down here, it has somewhere to travel. And by splitting the difference and making the cut, is just kind of a way to help you measure or meter how far away that you are from your wriggle line, and hopefully how far away you are from the previous cut, where this opening at the base will be somewhat consistent from leaf to leaf, is the point of me saying to do it that way. Now on the back side, or what's known as your outside work, you don't leave that space. You can start directly on the backbone. But even still, you're going to cover up the backbone with the tool and roll it to the corner. When you're outlining your cap cut, cover up the bright cut with the tool and pick it up to the corner. And then where that really starts to leave, you can kind of see that transition right there where it's kind of going with the backbone and then it curves away. Where that really starts to leave is a fine idea for where you can put the next cut. Now, I'm telling everybody to skip the forehand cut. So as a disclaimer in the video, I'm going to cut this next quote unquote bright cut group the traditional way with the third cut present. Forehand cut. Let me go to the scope for this. I want a good video of this for you guys that want to do it. Backhand cut. Cap cut. And for those of you that know a little bit about this, it'll be jumping ahead for some. S cut, meet it. That would finish the leaf. So it's 10 after 8. Let's take about a 3-minute bathroom break, and then we'll jump back on here, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some ways to really fancy up this style and some ways to lay it out. And we're going to do we're going to cut a little project with a little belt tip so that we can kind of go over practical application. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that, fellas. We were arguing. So that's the basic of the most basic. Your next fill-in is going to be with the aligner tool. I'm switching to a aligner tool. Mine's a 2010. Probably the most commonly used is an 1810. If you get a chance, read that link. It'll kind of explain to you what's going on, and then you can make your own decisions about how wide or narrow you can get away with, whether you're doing big belt buckles or you're doing little bitty bracelets and things. But what I hope that you realize is that most of these motions or most of these cuts, your hand and it is going through the same motion. In other words, the forehand cut is going to be the motion that this liner tool is going to take to put lines inside these leaves. All these areas between your bright cuts become leaves. And you're going to want to start down here at the base in this space that you saved between your bright cuts and your backbones. And you're going to start on the corner, and you want to be narrow. And just like you made the bright cut, as you go up the leaf, you want to get wider and wider, and hopefully you can get comfortable getting all the way to full width of the tool. And that'll make your line. Now I'm going to go to the scope and cut again so we can get a better look at it. Or never mind, I was in the scope already. But this is a big enough scroll. This may be a better camera shot for us. Now, there's a V that gets created down here. You can see where those liner tools run into the backbone. You want to make this next set of lines start way back down here. If I just came up here and started at the base of the leaf, I got a blank spot here. It's going to look like crap when it's finished. So you want to start, just look for that little V that it'll create. Hopefully you can see it, it's right there. And then the process is just going to repeat itself. Western style engraving is mind-numbing because it's so repetitive. So we'll start on the corner. This is also why you want control over how many lines that you're doing whenever you're cutting in this thin area. Then you're gradually getting wider as you go up. Now, in a situation like this, our liner tool was not wide enough to fill up that whole leaf. Well, you want to stay to the top. You don't want to stay to the bottom. If you're going to have a blank space in your leaf, you want it beneath the lines, not above the lines. And then you can see that a new V has been created right here, and that will be the beginning. That's where you're going to start your next group of lines that will end up filling up this leaf right here. Gradually rolling that graver over. And you can see that it starts to look pretty shaded. Now, to finish out the scroll, here's our new V that was created right here. You can see the lines are right up against our wriggled backbone. And then they stop right here, and there's a point right there. That point right there is where you're going to start your liner. So you're going to set your corner of your liner in there. And what you're hoping to do with this liner tool, the rate at which you flatten this tool out, is what you're trying to do is fill up this whole space with lines. So as this gets wider, you're going to roll that graver over in an attempt to fill that up with lines. And that's going to dictate the speed at which you flatten out this graver or widen out that graver. And here we're going to stay to the upside, and we're going to follow this all the way around. We're following the backbone now, and we're going to follow the ball or the head, seed head, whatever you want to call it, of the scroll, and we're going to follow that all the way around, like so. Now on your outside, it's the same, but since we didn't leave that space between the backbone and the bride cut group, see this point right here that I'm pointing at with the tool? That is your point of entry. That's where you're going to begin, and you're going to stay to the top, or you're gonna hug the bride cut group that's above you. So you're going to start with the corner against the backbone, and you're going to get wider as you go out. Now when that's a capped leaf, like this was already got the S cut on it, it'll show you a little bit better. You can see we've created a new V, or a new point, so we'll start at that point. We're going to stay with the backbone and gradually away from it, fanning out our leaf lines like that. Pretty simple, pretty crude in its most basic sense. Now I want to show you where the cross hatches go. Then I want to show you how to dress this up a little bit to where it looks nicer than this. I'm sure that if you've paid attention to very much bright cut engraving, Western bright cut, I'm sure you've seen some good examples of it and some really bad examples of it. This is the middle of the road example. In other words, this would be acceptable on handmade high-end Western belt buckles, but I want to show you some little things that you can change about this that'll really class it up. So your cross hatches, I'm going to go across my leaves like this right here. I'm going to make this motion a few times so that when you're watching the video back, maybe it'll burn into your memory. This is one that, for whatever reason, it's hard for it to click in people's mind. But I'm going to set my tool down, and remember, my cutting hand doesn't get to move. All of this movement has to be done with the vise. So as I push the pedal and begin to go, I'm turning the vise. And that just puts some little cross hatches right there. You can go up a couple of times if you want for more cross hatches. But the main thing that I want you to get out of this is that you're going to go across the leaves, across your leaves like this direction here. Now, see how the curvature of this crosshatch tool kind of fits in there and gives me good visibility? That's why I still, even though I like my liner tool squared off, I like my crosshatch tool rounded because it gives me good visibility. And I can set it down and just roll it across there. Now on the head of the scroll, at the very top of the scroll, everything goes in reverse. So you can come up here and we're going to move the vise and we're going to cross hatch across against the grain, if you will, this way. Like that. Now under high magnification it looks pretty jacked up, but we'll zoom back. Go to the other camera. And you can see that it looks a lot more like something that would be a Western bright cut style of engraving. Trying to catch it. I didn't sharpen my flat engraver very polished in hopes of not throwing a lot of light. Now what's missing from this is, with the exception of this leaf right here, none of these leaves are finished. In modified bright cut, in a lot of the other styles, the leaves would be completed, the shapes of the leaves would be completed before any shading takes place. I don't recommend doing that in bright cut engraving, because if you look at the lines, the shading lines in these leaves, I don't want those to overrun into a bright cut. So I'm just going to make my S cut, tuck that one in there to meet it. And while I'm making these S cuts, let me go to the scope. While I'm making these S cuts, I am removing some of my liner tool, some of my liner cuts. You can see how I took some of them off right there. That's a better look than if you did it the other way around. I'm not saying that it's not possible to do this and then go back and shade, but I think this is going to end up being a cleaner process, or a cleaner, I don't know the words that I'm looking for, but in the steps of 1, 2, 3, 4, I think finishing the leaves is best done last. So let's talk about some ways to class this up a little bit. As you gain more and more tool control, then you're going to be able to do some things, and you're going to be able to switch some things up. Now, I had Zane cut me a longer piece of copper that's going to be a lot more, this is, I had him cut this oblong. It could be a money clip, it could be a bracelet, it could be 100 different things. And without turning this into a drawing class, because one of the things that's significant about Western style bride cut is that there theoretically wouldn't be a whole lot of drawing involved. Now, what we're fixing to do is I'm just going to wriggle a border on this thing. That's not flat. Yeah, well, we're not going to go all the way around it. I just wanted to get an area where we could work on something that starts to look more like a real project. We got some good video footage in the video of the cuts that you should be practicing, and whenever you get comfortable making those cuts, then you'll be able to run into the glorious brick wall of layout. So, Chanel, I see your question. Whenever we crosshatch what we're about to do, I'll help that make more sense. So we know the rules of scrolls is that scrolls want to reach border to border. So we're just going to pop a scroll in here on this thing, and it's got to go all the way to the border and come back around. Now I know, and you know, that this is not a perfectly drawn scroll. You can look at it and say, that's not a perfectly drawn scroll. I don't care, because I'm not going to move my engraving hand. I'm going to let my vise correct that scroll. Now you could sit here and tweak on this until you got it just exactly perfect, but you probably don't have the budget or the time doing this style of engraving to get everything absolutely perfect. You're going to have to depend on the vise to make you more efficient. Now I'm going to spin a scroll just so that it's in the video and you can watch it. I'm going to spin a scroll off of the center of this one, and I'm going to break the border rule but it's going to be okay because I'm going to reach this border and this border, this backbone that's becoming the border. Now I have to deal with this area over here. I'll do that with a second scroll that reaches this border and this border. Now I'm going to think ahead whenever I cut this backbone that I'm going to have leaves. I'm going to have leaves coming off of this one and going this direction here. So when I cut this backbone, I'm going to want to stop right there so that these can be on top of that. I know that's jumping a little bit of advanced on the layout side, but in this day and age with as much information as on the internet, everybody kind of wants to jump ahead. And this is a little jump, it's not a big jump. But you can see that there's going to be leaves that grow right there. So when I cut this, I'm going to stop shy. Other than that, everything's going to be the same. Now, the first cut's going to go parallel to the border. Second cut's going to go with the backbone and gradually away from it until it runs into something. Then I'm going to split the difference, so forth and so on. Now, what do we do with this weird area right here? You go back to your rules. Your first bright cut group is going to go parallel to the border, and then it's going to go with the backbone and gradually away from it until it runs into something. With the backbone, gradually away from it until it runs into something. Now remember, these are where your bright cuts are going to go. So it's kind of old-fashioned to wriggle the backbones. That's just kind of an older style of engraving, and it's good practice if you want to do it, but to stay more up to date, I would recommend cutting your backbones with a V-graver of your choosing. I don't care what geometry it is, whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm just going to cut this scroll right here, but I'm going to switch to a different camera because I want you to see that I am not moving my hand, and that's what's going to fix that scroll. That's a spot that I have to stop because the other ones are going to come on top of it. And to resume cutting, I'm just going to act like I'm cutting it, but I'm not actually making a cut in the metal because I want this to lay out and fall where it would have been. And now I'm past all of those other scrolls and I can resume cutting. And I can see right now that I didn't even draw that scroll close to round. And I hope that showed that this hand didn't, I was looking through the scope, but I hope that showed that I didn't do a bunch of this with my hand. I was bringing the work to the tool. If nothing else, I want you to pick that up from this. So you can see how far off the scroll was there. Now we're going to cut this scroll, not moving my hand and letting the vise correct me. Same for this one. Pretty round, right? So, a while ago when we were cutting these, our scrolls were pretty small and pretty round. The fact that these scrolls are drawn a little bit more elongated is going to change the shape of our leaves to where when we stay parallel with the backbone, we're going to stay parallel with the backbone a little bit longer. And this is where you're going to need the graver control to control that taper. Okay, I'm not going to cap that just yet. That's one of the things that I want to show you to change. But what I am going to do is follow the same rule of split the difference. But because this is elongated and I'm trying to class it up a bit, I'm going to scoot back. I'm going to tuck back up in here a little bit deeper. And that's going to give it a different look. Tucking back up in there deeper and staying with that backbone a little bit longer and letting this bright cut group mature a little bit slower is going to change the look of it significantly. And we're just going to, that process is just going to repeat itself. I wish it was more exciting than that, but it's just not. Then the last leaf will be the one that ties in right here, and that will complete this scroll. Now, rather than using the other corner of the flat to outline these, I want you to go back to your V graver for a couple of different reasons. For one, you're probably going to feel like you have more control with it. You can be more precise. For two, if you intend to take your engraving beyond just Western Bright Cut, you might as well start making friends with this V graver. So let me go into the microscope. Now see how those cuts are a little bit jagged on the top? This is your perfect chance to fix it. And I'm not doing any rolling or anything fancy with this tool. I'm just outlining the cut. Now I am going to bring it all the way around. And then this process is going to repeat itself on all of those leaves. And you can see there's some impurities, there's some kind of wonkiness, if that's even a word. There's some wonkiness on that bright cut, and there was in this one too, but this outline cut is what I was able to use to crisp that up and true that up to where it was nice and round. Now it was nice and round because I didn't argue with my vise. I used the vise to turn instead of trying to go around there with my engraving hand. Again, this process is going to repeat itself. Don't be lazy, go all the way around. All right, so there we have a scroll backbone with bright cut groups in it. And now it's time for the liner. So we're going to switch to the liner. And see this little spot down here? That's going to be our point that we start lining from. Using just the corner of the liner, you can see I've got that tilted. Using the corner, and as I go around the leaf, I'll roll this back down flat. I'm going to hug the line above me. Now we got a new point. That created a new point right there. That's going to be the point at which we start the next group of lines. Hugging the line above you. Now we have a new point. Hopefully you guys can see that right there. That's going to be where we start our next group of lines. And we're going to hug the line above us. Well, where does the next one start? You can see that we've formed a new point right there. That's going to be where we start the next group of lines. But I want to cut this one through the microscope. And then to finish that scroll off, you can see our new point that's right there. That's where we're going to start our line for the next one. I'm harping on that because that's where everybody screws this up. Chanel, on your liner question, it really doesn't matter. A lot of it's personal preference, but what you'll find dictates most of it is that when you get into your really, really narrow gravers, it starts getting, the look of it starts getting really frosty and they get harder to control. But sometimes the size of the work that you're doing is going to dictate whether you need a wide graver or whether you need a really narrow graver. If you were going to do Western bright cut on, let's say, a pair of earrings that were about the size of a dime, then obviously you're going to want to use smaller chisels, and you would take that into consideration when you were selecting a liner tool. Again, we're going to hug the line that's above us, not the line that's below us. And we're going to come all the way around. And now we have a scroll. With the scroll, we got our bright cut groups. And this is cut in a traditional fashion. We just didn't use all three cuts for the bright cut. We covered that earlier in the video. We used our liner tool and we hugged the bright cut that was above us. And then that presented us with a new starting point each time. And now we'll do our crosshatch. Now, in answer to your question, Chanel, the logic of the crosshatch, well, let's back up just a minute. I didn't understand the logic of the crosshatch, and for years and years I fancied myself a Western style engraver. I didn't know much about gun engraving, and we would always put the crosshatch on the tip of the leaf. Tip of the leaf, tip of the leaf, tip of the leaf. Now, as I got into gun engraving, I realized that that was fundamentally wrong, that your shading would have been at the base of the leaf, or your crosshatching would have been at the base of the leaf, because you want it to be darker down here. Traditional Western engraving, you can put your crosshatch at the tip of the leaf. I'm not going to beat you up about putting it at the base of the leaf until we get into the modified style bright cut, which is when Western style engraving starts transitioning into a gun style. So put your crosshatches at the tip of the leaf for now, going against the grain, against the grain, against the grain, and there. So now we have our backbone, our bright cuts, our lines, and our crosshatches. And the only thing left to do is to close in this area right here between the bright cuts so that they look like something that resembles leaves. So we'll go back to the flat graver. You certainly could do this with a V graver, but I'm trying to keep this on the traditional side of Western. And you're going to want to make an S cut. Remember the S cut that I said that you wanted to practice, that looked like that. That's all this is. You're going to start on this corner, you're going to widen out and narrow back up while you're turning the vise. You're going to boom, boom, just like that. So the beginning where you want to start this S cut is inside the cap cut. This is going to sound confusing. Inside the cap cut of the bright cut below you. Or, if you're a visual person, right here. So you're going to lay the corner of your graver in the cut that you've already made. And you're going to follow along with that cut, and then you're going to come out of that cut. So I'm going to do it real slow. I'm following along. Now I'm going to come out of that cut and turn the vise and widen the tool, and then come back out thin. And that's all you need. That's your S cut. That caps off that leaf to make it a traditional Western style bright cut leaf. And then this process, boom, 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 it's going to repeat itself around the scroll. Everything's repetitive. So we'll set the corner of our tool in the previous cap cut, or for the visual guys, right there. And we're going to go around, and then we're going to cut out of it and widen. We're going to flatten out the graver, make it wide, and then make it narrow again as we turn the vise back the other way. And we'll do the same here. Start in there, make it wide, make it narrow. Those are smaller leaves, so everything happens faster. Same here. Boom, boom. And now you have a style of engraving that would be considered traditional Western. And it looks a little bit better than what we did on the other side of the plate or on the other plate, because everything's a bit more stretched out. Now we're going to cut this one together, and I want to point out that this one is not only is it stretched out, but it's skinny and stretched out. And I want you to see that this shape of scroll is going to give, in my opinion, a better look. In your opinion, it may just simply be a different look. But what I want you to take from this is A, the process of making these cuts, of course, but secondly, how you want your engraving to look is going to be dictated by the shape of your scrolls, whether they're round scrolls, whether they're stretched out scrolls with a little head. The shape of the backbone is what determines the appearance of your engraving, not what you actually do in here. That's very methodical, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So let's jump right on that next scroll. And the first bright cut group always runs parallel with the border. We don't have a border here, we have another backbone. This backbone is the same as a border. So, there's the first bright cut, parallel with the border. We're going to split the difference, and then I'm going to tuck it back in here a little bit. Now, I'm going to go with the backbone. I'm going to stay parallel to the backbone of the scroll, and then I'm gradually going to fan this out. Only this time I want to get a lot of that tool. I want to get a really wide bright cut. And you'll find out in some of your later styles that this bright cut is actually negative space. But I don't want to open that can of worms right now. So split the difference. Now I'm going to tuck it back up in here a little ways. I'm going to stay with the backbone. I'm going to get really wide. Hopefully you're beginning to pick up on, if you can do 4 of these cuts right, you can do all of them right, because they're the exact same 4 cuts over and over again. Alright, so there they are. What do they need next? Well, they need to be cleaned up. They need to be cleaned up. Their imperfections need to be removed or hidden. And I'm going to use my V-graver for that. And I'm just going to outline them. Don't be lazy, come all the way around. See how I came all the way to the bottom? Don't be lazy. This one's really jacked up, but I have the power to fix that on this cap cut. All the way around. The next one's all messed up too. What's wrong with me? You'll never know it because I'm going to fix it with this cap cut. And now we have our next scroll ready to put the shading in. So we're going to start at the point that we should. There's the point. That's where we're going to start. We're going to run these lines up through here, and we're going to hug or stay to the set of bright cuts above us. And get gradually wider as we go. It's a lot to keep up with, but once it gets easy for you, it'll stay easy for you. If you just absolutely wanted to fill this whole thing up, which is not necessary, but if you just wanted to, see this point that gets created right there? That would be your starting place, and then you would make another pass. And you could completely fill that leap up with shading. But aside from that, our next point, there's our point right there that would have been created. The next point down here can't zoom out anymore and stay on the scope. So our next point right there. So who knows what's next? Yep, crosshatch. So we'll crosshatch the tip of our leaves and we're just going to go against the grain just like that. So and last but certainly not least, our S-cut. So remember, this is one that people easily forget. When you begin this S-cut, you want to put the corner of your tool in the cap cut of the leaf below it. So we're going to go with this line. We'll come out of it, widen out while we turn the vise, and then thin up while we turn the vise back. And it'll give us, you can see the S right there. Now this leaf is a little tricky, so I want to, it's kind of a theory in the modified when you start learning how to shape and control your leaves a little bit better. But I want to pick a target of this right here being the tip of my leaf. And you can kind of see that that already is taking the shape of a leaf. But using this exact same S cut, I want to put the S on the top so I can curve up in there to it. And then I'll cut an arc here to go with it. Not strictly traditional, but when you see Western engravers, you start seeing a lot of other influences in their engraving styles, and we're going to talk about that a little bit whenever we fill in this space right here. So just for the sake of having an example that you can look at, we have to close this in and make it a leaf. This is our target, and you always want to start a cut from inside of another cut. So I'm going to start with this edge of my tool hanging over into that cut. And I'm going to go with it, and I'll tuck that S back up into there. And now I'm just going to cut an arc to join them. And it just gives you the ability to give your leaves a little bit different shape. Now we'll get back on the beaten path and cut this as a regular S. And this is a regular S. And then that completes the second scroll. Hey, we really ought to think about cleaning that lens thing. And, you know, starting to look like Western bright cut. So let's talk about this little pocket right here, because anytime you have round objects trying to fill up a rectangle or square space, you're going to have these little triangles right here. Just remember the most basic rules, that your first bright cut runs parallel with the border, and we have a border here. So I'll start here, and there's the first bright cut right there. From there, remember, we're on the back side, we're on the outside, we don't leave a gap. We can start right inside the backbone. And we're going to go with the backbone, gradually away from the backbone until we run into something. Now, aka BS bright cuts. Everybody knows what BS stands for. Okay, sometimes in Western style engraving, you end up with a little pocket like this right here. And you just put some BS cut in there to make it shiny and flashy. So this is the BS zone. We'll come right back to that. So just like the other stuff, what's next here? The cap cut. So I'm going to go back to the V graver. Absolutely, yes, of course, you could make the cap cut with your flat by laying it on the corner like we did earlier in the video. But I would like for you to start using the V graver. I think it'll pay you dividends in the long run. And we're just going to outline our bright cut. And we'll outline both of them. Okay. Now, remember the leaf that we cut right here where I said we were jumping ahead a little bit? This is why. I want you to be able to pick a target in these weirdo areas like this and have a little bit more tricks in your bag than just one simple S-cut, because you're going to need them, because you end up with spots like this. And I want to pick a target. I want to make that leaf reach way up into this area, because the purpose of Western style bright cut is to be able to fill a blank area up with engraving, flashy, shiny engraving. So using the same theory that we did a while ago, we're going to cut the S cut out of this, and this is the target for the tip of our leaf. Just like so. And then I'll connect them. And there's a leaf right there. Now we got this little bitty spot that I talked about. You're going to need some BS cuts in your bag. It's just going to happen. So the point of bright cut is that it be bright and flashy. So we're just going to split this with some cuts and disturb that surface so that it makes a shiny spot. You don't want to leave any smooth metal like this is. You want every area of the surface that you're engraving to be disturbed. You do want to lay things out in such a way that you don't have very many of these spots. But if it comes up and you have one, just make a flashy bright cut. If it's a really big area like this, then you're going to have to turn it into a leaf or something. But these little bitty spots like this, you can just make kind of a flash or a filler cut. And then on that one leaf that we got sticking out there, the next step would be the line. You look for the point. There's the point right there. That's where we're going to start our lines. And we're going to stay with the bright cut above us and fan it out like so. And then naturally step 4 would be the crosshatch. And it goes against the grain. Like so. Now as you back away from it, you can start to see that it looks the part. Western style bright cut. Now, for the sake of being thorough, let's talk about this big master scroll. You know, bright cut is kind of tricky. If you try to read some of the gun engraving books, they're going to be somewhat confusing in how you would go about a Western style bright cut. So, unfortunately, to my knowledge, there's not any great books out there in terms of drawing. Now, what does apply is, I think Lee Griffith's book is probably the best book out there as far as just drawing the backbones of your scroll. The rules of drawing a scroll backbone or the rules of drawing a scroll backbone. The master scroll or the origin scroll is the biggest, and then after that, they can be equal or lesser size. One grows from the other. And as far as the drawing of the scrolls. Now, what you can take away from what we're talking about in this video is how to fill up the scrolls and what order to do it in to do a Western style bright cut. And again, I'm going to draw this on there just so that we can go through the process and kind of drive that home with muscle memory. Now, disclaimer, I don't like having this big of an open space. I would add another scroll. I would come in here and pencil me in another scroll to kind of break up that big space, that big area. And even in this triangle right here, that's a really big area. I would probably spin a scroll off of this one and break that area up a bit too. But even in doing so, look at how the scrolls are following the rules. It has an origin and it went all the way to a border or until it ran into something on this side, went all the way to the border on this side. And I know this isn't really a drawing video about scrolls, but you have to honor that this distance from here to here should be about half of the distance from here to here. Then I'll use my vise to correct that to where it's perfectly round. So we'll go ahead and cut that. And that could be wriggled. I prefer it to be cut with a V-graver. You could cut it with a flat graver using just the corner, but I would really like, if you're not already using V-gravers or single point. Earlier, Mark, whenever I said single point gun engraving, I was referring to a tool that has a single point. It was just lingo. I wasn't saying anything secret or odd, just a choice of words. Whenever you start to cut a scroll that's spun off of another scroll, I'm big about start a cut from inside of a cut. It'll help you make sure that all of your origins are true. So when I start to cut this scroll, I'm going to start in this scroll and I'm going to kind of follow along with that scroll until it's time for me to go out here and cut this actual scroll. And it's just a way to help ensure a good transition. Now, for this section of the video, I'm not going to talk a whole lot. I want you guys to see what this looks like in real time. Now, this is kind of a funny situation. This cut right here actually would need to continue on around to here, but it goes into the background. And the way that you can deal with that is cut up to it and then just kind of above the metal turn the vise so that you can see the path, what the path of travel would have been, and then pick up where you left off. Now I did something a little bit different on here. Now, not this guy, the knob on my engraver hit the vise, but but on these guys right here, notice that I stopped just a little bit shy of the backbone. You know, I have been saying in this video, continue till you hit something, continue till you hit something. I was trying to get that in your mind so that you would know to go all of the way. But once that makes pretty good sense to you, then you can start to anticipate the cap cut. And I'll use the cap cut to finish that. You can see how I use my cap cut to fill in that gap. Thing's cussing me. He's like, why didn't you tell me that before, Dad? Now, that does a couple of different things for you. Now remember, these don't finish, they go into the background. And it'll finish here. Alright, let me cap these. Alright, we don't need those. I want to talk about that gap that I left just a little bit. Whenever these were gapped, and then it gave me room to cap those, and if I needed to stretch out that cap, I could cut deeper and make that cap cut wider. That's going to come to your advantage if you antique it or darken this, because around the tips of these, it's going to hold a little bit more color. It's going to be darker right there because you got a deeper, bolder cut. But it also gives you just the smallest spot to put the tip of your leaf. I'm going to shade these right quick. Just slap some shade lines in there. put some caps on it right quick. Okay. Now, hopefully you agree with me when I think that the ends of those bright cuts look better having left just a little bit of gap and anticipating where that cap's going to come around so that I can be a little bit heavier handed right there and make those a bit bolder in the design. Now, I realize that falls into the court of opinion, but I like the way that that looks better, and that's achieved by leaving a little bit of a gap right there as opposed to where we brought these all the way up and the cap kind of had to run into the other backbone line. It's not as clean in my mind. But whenever you go to make your S cuts and turn these into leaves, the tip of that leaf has somewhere to be. Now this is a little different situation. This is going to be one of those targeted leaves. Your S cut can go up or down. If you wanted to, you could start from the cut above you and do your S cut down. That's commonly done, probably looks familiar. Now, right there where I popped that cut out, let me go to the scope. By having this cap deep right here, in other words, we talked about the little gap that was left right there so that I could be a little bit heavier handed with this cap cut coming around. It gives the depth of that, gives this chip that this S cut makes, it gives it a place to release. And it makes that chip pop out so much easier because what happens is when you come in through here with that S cut and you flip back, you're out of metal, so the chip just comes loose and it allows you to be a little bit better, a little bit cleaner. When you look at this, everything looks a bit cleaner than this does. This looks kind of jumbled up and a little bit mashed. I'm not saying that it's bad, but I'm of the opinion that that looks cleaner. You can make your own decisions. I wanted to show you both ways because this is the basic fundamentals. These are some of the little things, little tweaks that you can do that make it a little bit cleaner and nicer. And that's that's kind of a down and dirty rundown of Western style bright cut engraving. If you can draw a scroll and you can make this cut, this cut, and this cut, you can do this style of engraving. One thing I want to point out, I know we've got some jewelry makers and some bit and spur builders in the group. Just real quick, I'm going to run a wriggle right here. You do not, I repeat, you do not have to have a scroll to use the bright cut theory. What you want to do is imagine that this border line is the scroll backbone. And then it's going to help you to make what's commonly called bright cut groups. And you would treat this as though you were on the outside of a scroll. In other words, no need to leave a space. Just start right on the line. Then you go to your cap. And notice again here I left just a little bit of space to give me room to be heavy-handed with my cap cut. That is completely optional. That's just a me thing. I like it better. Then your liner, all your points are already predetermined where you're going to start making these line cuts. Remember the point that we were looking for earlier? Well, it's already right there on all of these. So that's where you're going to start with the corner of that, and you're going to hug to the bright cut above you. Then I bet everybody knows that the next step is crosshatch. You're going to go to the opposite side of the leaf and cut across the grain or against the grain. Just a little roll. And then back to the flat for the infamous S-cut, which will start in the cap cut of the leaf below it. In, out. And if that was a silver bar on a pair of spurs or a bar necklace or around a set of hoop earrings or something like that, it would fit right in. So the purpose of having this all in a group is so that as you guys practice, you have somewhere to post it and we can give each other feedback and maybe support. You know, sometimes when you post engraving on the internet, you get beat up pretty bad, and you don't need that while you're trying to learn. So this was to kind of create an environment. So as you do your practice on Western Bright Cut, post it up. I'll do the best I can about answering questions. The group's not going away. And I guess that's about it. Gail, the crosshatch tool, there's some links in the comments posted by, is it posted by us or by you? Okay, it's posted by Texas Engraving School on where to get them, and the ideal crosshatch tool is going to be an 832, which is available from GRS. I don't know who else carries it. And guys, if you have any questions, that's what the group's for. That's why it's done this way. That's why it's not just simply a video and there you go. It's so that there can be some interaction on the journey. So thank you guys for jumping in my class. Practice this up. I don't know if any of you guys are interested in the modified next week, but what we covered tonight will help you greatly understand modified bright cut, which in my opinion, Western is the place to start. You get your graver control, you get your vise control, you get your ball control. Then you can move into a modified where we can start backing it up and adding thumbs, doing a lot more leaf shaping, a lot more targeting of the leaves. And then you're playing a game that you could put on a gun or pocket knives. Or anyway, guys, thanks for supporting my efforts to put these videos on, and y'all go cut something.